Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, so glad you're joining us today. We're talking with my buddy Kevin, and we're talking about adding additional services. How do you add services to your church? When do you know you're ready? What's the smartest way of doing it? And so if you're growing, you're going to face that, and there's a smart way of doing it. And we're talking about that today. So it's going to be an amazing conversation. I want to remind you about Church Boom University. That is an ongoing platform that you can be a part of, where you can continually learn and grow. It's got master classes. It's got video training, stuff from myself, Sam Chan, many others. Every month or every quarter, you get a resource sent to you, a book sent to you, special selective webinars that we do just for Church Boom University people. It's not a college, although it's called Church Boom University, but it's a platform for continual learning. So make sure you go to churchboom.org and sign up for the Church Boom University. And let's jump into the conversation with my good buddy Kevin. It's so awesome to be with you. How can I serve you today? And man, what are some questions you have for me today?
That's awesome. Chris, just thank you for taking our coaching questions, and we look forward to hearing your responses.
Absolutely.
So over the last year, we've roughly doubled, maybe a little more here in church, and we've got a small sanctuary, about 150 seats. Of course, once we get to about 115 or 20 people, that really begins to feel congested. So we went to a second service last fall. Right now, we're probably running a strong 100 to maybe 110 in each service. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve. We don't want to cap ourselves. So when is it smarter to consider building as opposed to going to a third service? What's your benchmarks for that?
Well, I think there's a lot. Building is extremely expensive. Yeah. And I can tell you that I know at one of our campuses a few years back, we got up to about, which is crazy, we got up to 6 weekend services, but we just didn't want to build. So we got to about 6, and then we started another campus, but that brought us down to 5 or 4. Then we started building up again, then started another campus. Building is really expensive. I'm personally a bigger fan of multiple services because it gives multiple opportunities. It's cheaper. But also it forces the team to start thinking about, are we truly developing leaders, and are we truly developing teams? Because once you go to 3 services, now you've got to add more leaders and you have to have more teams. So, I'm not saying, but again, I don't know what your church looks like. You may be able to blast out the back wall and add 150 chairs for next to nothing, and that might be worthy of it. But if I was at 2 services, I would go to 3 no matter what, because I want there to be a little bit of crowded and maybe even a little inconvenience to the people so that they feel the pressure of the growth and they want to respond. Yeah. People respond more to pressure than almost anything else. Mm-hmm. And so if it's 2 services, it's like, I don't know if they feel pressure. When you go to 3 or 4 and it's just like, folks, we got to do something, man. That's when I think people feel pressure. There's an old saying that we shape the building, then the building shapes us. Mm-hmm. So when we shape the building of, hey, we took a $2 million loan out or a $4 million loan out, that shapes how we do ministry because we have to service that debt. So always a bigger fan personally of multiple services and creating pressure and some inconvenience so that people respond accordingly. Yeah. That's what I love. And, I have opinions on how you should launch those second services. I don't think you should ever start one. I think you should launch it or plant it. And I think that's very different, but that's a different subject altogether. Yeah. I'm not a fan of just starting a third service. I'm a fan of planting a third service, but that's a separate subject. But I think at 2 services, I would keep adding until there's a feeling of pressure.
Okay. Could you expand just a little bit on your last comments about not starting a third service, but launching it? Or
Yeah. If I'm you and I've got 110 people going to each service, so I'm pushing that 70 to 80% mark. if it seats 150, then 120 is 80%. So you're pushing the 80% mark. And anytime you push 80% mark with your parking, with your children, or with your main auditorium, it's a sign that you might want to consider a third service. So you always want to look at those three: parking, children, and main auditorium. When it comes to that third service, there's a real big difference. A lot of times a guy will approach adding a service, whether he's adding a second one or adding a third one or whatever. He adds it by saying, starting in 3 weeks, our service times are now 8, 10, and 12, or whatever they do. And then that Sunday shows up, they hold their breath and they see who shows up. I think you miss an amazing opportunity to create potential growth. So I don't know if you've ever planted a church before, but we've planted several, and the planning process is, okay, if I were you, I would look at the three. I would want to know a couple things. First, I'd want to know who's going to go to what service. So let's say your services, what time are their services right now?
9 and 11.
9 and 11. So you're like, okay, we're going to have to shorten down our services even more. Right. So maybe now we're going to go to 8:30, 10, 11:30. I'm just making this up. Okay, that's only an hour and a half apart. So your services are going to really cut down. However, right now at 9, you're going to have people. The 9 o'clock is going to make a move to 8:30, or they're going to make a move to 10. Your 11 o'clock is going to make a move to 10, or they're going to make a move to 11:30. You're forcing decisions either way, which is what you want. Secondly, it's good to know who's going to go to what service. So what I love from a planting standpoint, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks out, probably more like 6, 7 weeks out, hey, we're thinking about starting a third service, maybe even 2 months out. We're thinking about starting a third service. We've reached 80%. You got a card in front of you. If you were to, tell us, if we were to switch to 3 services and do 8:30, 10, 11:30, which one would you come to? So they put their name. This is what I would put there: name, cell, and email. How many people are represented? How many kids, children under 12, and how many adults are represented in their family, and then what service? Because I want to know, okay, if that person fills it out, does that represent 3 adults? Does that represent 2 children, no children? So now I get it, and I look at it, and I'm like, okay, 8:30, 10, 11:30. Wow. We got hardly anybody going 11:30. Let's see if we can get some people that said 10 o'clock to move them 11:30 before we even get there. That's thing number one. You want to balance this thing out as much as you can. Not going to be perfectly balanced, but you want to balance it out. Secondly is now 4 weeks before, 5 weeks before, whatever it is, you are starting to communicate to these people as if they're launching a service. So you take all that data, right, all the cards, and you're like, now you got 8:30 group, you got a 10 group, and you got 11:30 group. You're sending an email, or Pastor, you're doing a quick little iPhone video, for 2 minutes, and you're saying, or however you want to do it, text or whatever, but hey, 8:30 team, I'm so excited. We are 4 weeks away from launching. Be praying about who you're going to bring. What is God going to do? Be joining me in prayer this week, 3 weeks before, 2 weeks before, 1 week before. But you're doing, hey, 8:30 team, hey, 10 o'clock team, hey, 11:30 team. You're doing the same speech. You're just changing to the 8:30, 10, or 11:30. But it's feeling, in church planning world, we call that a core group or a launch team. They're feeling like a launch team. Hey, 8:30 launch team. They're feeling like a launch team. And at 10 o'clock and at 11:30, and you want them to feel like that. You want them to feel like we're launching the 11:30. We are the 8:30 launch team. We're the 10 o'clock, 11:30 launch team. And you want them to feel like that. And so that's an important thing. And it allows you, now with 2 services, it's a little hard to do this next thing, but to go to 3. But if there's a way, maybe it's like, hey, if you're part of the 8:30 team, go to the 11 o'clock service next week. We want to meet with you after service. Hey, if you're part of the 10 o'clock team, go to the 11 o'clock service this week, and we want to buy you lunch after. And what you're doing is now you have a meeting with your launch team one time, in addition to communicating with them, and you are helping them and pumping them up and telling them how great they are, and they're going to bring friends, and there's ownership. People support, you guys. People support what they create. Right. Whatever they create, whatever they feel like they're creating, they'll support it. So take everything I just said and compare it to, all right, next week we're having 3 services. Let's see who shows up. Versus, oh, no, we're strategizing here. Outreach Magazine says there's 3 ways that churches tend to grow the most: when they have a new building, new renovation, or add services. And those 3 are all equal with each other. Adding services work, but it's a lot better than just adding service. You want to launch a service.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question concerning that theory. Have you ever been in a situation where you're like your 3rd service you launched, or another service that you launched, only were adults, that you did not do children's ministry? And
Yeah, you can do like, I don't know if we've done it totally that way, but I've recommended, or I've seen done in my own world and other worlds, 5 and under, or kindergarten and under. We provide childcare. Because if someone shows up with a 3-year-old, that's going to be that's bad. They're going to be running around and whatever, which they should be. They're 3 years old, but it's going to distract the entire service. You can kind of somewhat get a hold of a 6, 7-year-old and just have them sit there quietly and color, but you can't do that with the 5 and under. So 2 things: 1, 5 and under. If you did one and said, hey, this is kind of an adult service, or we however you want to word it, whatever thing you want to give it, we only provide childcare for 5 and under. I wouldn't do it as no childcare personally, because someone's going to show up with a 3-year-old, and it's going to be distracting. So 5 and under. Second thing I would do is someone shows up and they, and let's say it's a guest shows up and they're like, we've got a 7-year-old. Yeah, bring them on into the service. You know what we're going to have for them? We're going to have a very small coloring book and a little bit of crayons, and we're going to give it to them as a gift to those kids so they can sit there and color and play, and the parents feel like, wow, they really thought of how to take care of my kid during this hour.
That's super. Yeah. Super good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so let me go back to the building process. We do have land to build on here.
Okay.
And anyway, if we went the direction of building, how do you properly balance between faith for that project as opposed to the reality of finances that go along with that? So I know you got to have both.
Yep.
And it's a stretch for both.
Yep, it is. I do think you have to live somewhere in between faith and reality.
Yeah.
Someone says, we're going to raise $100 million. I'm not saying God can't do it, but man, God, if you're going to make that announcement, you better make sure God's in it. That's a lot of money. But I do think it has to be a little stretch. I like the stretch. I don't know what your budget is. I don't know what your income is. But I don't know. Again, I'd have to look at all of that, and then we'd have to see what the building costs are. But I do think you have to live between reality and faith, and I think it has to be big enough that God's got to step in, and not so big enough that people are like, what in the world are you thinking? That's not wisdom, because at some point you jump into a lack of wisdom.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you're not, and I've been with a lot of pastors where I'm like, oh, I got faith. I'm like, I don't know if this is faith. I think this is a lack of wisdom. And it's not an issue of faith. It's an issue of, this is not smart. Your church ain't ready for this. Yeah. And you don't need to build something that big. It's not even smart to build something that big right now. It's just, there's a lot of that. The other thing I would just, and I'll just throw this out there, even though you didn't ask it, is we work with a lot of churches, several hundred, almost every month it feels like, with different things that we do. So we have a lot of churches that we are in, kind of know about, with all the coaching and everything, that they're in a building program and they're redoing their parking lot. The cost to build right now is just astounding. To build right now. It is just dramatically higher than it was just a couple of years ago. Yeah. For example, a church in Texas that we've been coaching them executively for, 2-3 years. When we first met them, they were just signing contracts and getting ready for, I don't remember the exact, for about a $3 million project. They were very comfortable with that. Okay. But they still were just going to raise money. So they started to raise money. By the time they were first year into their campaign, it went up to 4.5. Last week, I talked to the guy on the phone. It's now 6.9.
Yeah.
It's the same exact project.
Yeah.
But the cost of steel, it just went up and up and up. So If you decide to go that route, spend very little money to get the best bid you can to really think, okay, can we do this?
Yeah.
And then add 15% on top of that.
Right.
It's contingency. You always want to add more on top of that. So if they tell you $1 million, it's not going to be $1 million. Make it $1.2 million. So I would really look into it first, though, because right now, man, building is just hugely. And what you don't want is, unless you got a lot of money or someone paying for it, you don't want a big old debt hanging over your head.
Right.
So I'm not against building at all. I love building. I've built plenty of buildings, but I am a fan of just exercise of the wisdom in it. And right now, it's very expensive to build. Even if you own the property, it is.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so back to launching a third service then.
Yep.
How do we, what's a good process for just motivating our volunteers and
for launching a third service?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, just always remember that the meeting before the meeting is the most important meeting. Mm-hmm. Telling the church is not the most important meeting. The meeting before the meeting is the most important meeting on anything. We're going to change something big. We're going to raise money. The meeting before the meeting is the most important meeting. Mm-hmm. And it's, okay, is the staff on board? Is the board on board? Is the key leaders on board? Is the volunteers on board? If they're on board, the whole church is on board. But you got to go through kind of that kind of thing. Now, when you're going to launch another service, and I don't know who answers to who, I don't know if you have we got worship, we got youth, we got children, we have all things next step, we have assimilation or impressions team or first impressions team or guest relations team. I don't know what you call that all, but if it's me and we're thinking about launching a third service, I'm bringing them in, and I'm saying, okay, we're thinking about going to a third service. We need to start thinking about how many more volunteers you need and how many more leaders you need. Just adding a third service, if they don't feel like you helped them with that, I'm not saying every time, but sometimes it'll be like, this is too much. I don't have enough children's volunteers. Now we launched the third service. There's nothing we can do about it. And I promise you the children's pastor or whoever won't blame themselves. They'll blame you because you shouldn't have started it. And I told you we shouldn't have started it. You got to step back and say, okay, I'll talk to your son, Jacob, and be like, okay, Jacob, you're in charge of the youth, or you're in charge of the worship. That's even better. Okay, what does that mean? How many more volunteers do you need? How many more leaders do you need? Oh, you're in charge of the children. How many more leaders do you need? How many more volunteers do you need? More. I just need more. That's not an answer. Is it 4? Is it 8? Is it 12? They need to be very specific. Someone's got to get to your 4 or 5 major departments and be very specific. How many more leaders do you exactly need, and how many more volunteers? The answer isn't more. They'll tell you more. I don't know, maybe 5 or 8. What? Show me that you need more. They need to think through okay, and from a flow chart standpoint, all right, if I've got 3 services and I've got a captain over every service, I'm going to need 2 more leaders. 8 more volunteers. Okay, I got it. You need to help them think it through, because you don't want the quality to lower the quality. You don't want to lower the quality.
Right.
You want high quality at every service.
Yeah.
And you want them thinking about developing leaders and building teams. And I'm telling you, most of the time they're just going to say more. The answer isn't more, because they haven't thought it through. The answer is get very specific and tell me. So I'd meet with them, but I'd meet with the department heads first. Yeah. The ones that it really truly impacts. Okay. The average volunteer doesn't impact, but the ones that really does impact. And then get very specific. Literally, Jacob, you'd sit down and go, okay, what do you really, really need in the children's department? Well, I need more. No, what exactly do you need? Okay, have you thought this through? Maybe it's time to restructure how you do children. Maybe you need a captain for every service, and maybe you need all this. Just help them think a little differently. Remember, anytime anything grows, structure has to change. When structure doesn't change, you're going to lessen the quality. Anytime, it's like if all 3 of us got on a plane and decided we're all, builders, and we said, we're going to add 25 stories to the Empire State Building. No, we're not. Not if we don't change the structure. Mm-hmm. What happens down here has to change first before what happens up here. Before we just say, we're going to add a third service. Okay, but what needs to change here?
Yeah, that's good.
Structure always changes before you grow. You have to change structure.
Yeah, that's good. So I guess let me throw one more question at you in light of that.
Yeah.
In light of like maybe having more of an adult service with like 5 and under or something taken care of, what's your thought about, do we still have 3 exact same services? Or do we try to tailor one more for the adults? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Personally, I wouldn't.
Yeah, okay.
I,
That's
I'm,
my feeling.
yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I'm a fan
Yeah.
of this is our culture.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's going to work for everybody. It's not.
Right.
But this is our culture. And if we
Yeah.
start having all these different cultures in under the roof, I don't know, man, under the same roof.
Yeah.
Larry
I
Osborne
agree.
can get away with it because he's got 55 buildings on his property, but in San Diego. But if you got one building, you're doing 3 services, this is the culture. Now, you might, say, hey, we're really tight in between the first 2 services, so instead of 4 songs, we're going to do 3. I mean, yeah, but the culture's not going to change.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I agree. I just wanted to hear your
Yeah.
take on that. Sure.
Yeah.
Jacob, do you have any questions? Anything you'd want to?
Not much, other than I feel we're in a pretty rural area, like out in the country, and there's a lot of cultural norms around churches just doing one service, and so I feel like we kind of fight that a little bit. We're kind of drudging through new ground with people, and so they're not. It's kind of not even in their brain space
Right.
to think, well, what are we doing? Just add,
Yeah.
And so a little bit of that cultural issue I just moved here
Yeah.
pretty recently, but
Yeah.
that's something I've noticed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I understand that. I think that every communities have their nuances. How people act in a rural Missouri is completely different than how they act in New York City. It's just different. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's just different. And I think part of the cultural challenge might be reduced the more that they understand the mission and grab the heart of God and the heart of you guys as pastors. Because often, because I've seen it in not so rural communities, I've seen it in suburbs where it's like, we just want one service. Maybe it's not they're used to it, but we just want one. Everybody knows each other. We all were family, whatever. What that happens, even in the suburb setting, what happens is they're not really catching hold of the mission. They're not really catching the heart of God. They're not catching the heart of the mission. They're not catching the heart of go into all the world, preach the gospel, let my house be full, compel them to come in. They're not catching the heart of the lead pastor. They're not catching the heart. So I would say that, that might be cultural, and I have seen it both rural and suburban, but a lot of that comes down to they're choosing preference over purpose. People will most often choose preference over purpose.
Yeah.
Our job is to culturally change that. It's not changing, hey, we're rural and we're used to one service. It's, I need you to start thinking about purpose more than preference. I need you to start thinking about the heart of God.
Yeah. It's good.
And I think it's like, again, so goes the volunteers and the leaders, so goes the church.
Yeah.
Those are really honest and candid conversations. Pull up a chair at a volunteer meeting. You got 50 people in a room, whatever. Pull up a chair and just say, let me just have an honest talk with you. Here's part of the challenge. And part of the challenge is people want one service. Part of the challenge is that, whatever, list the challenge. But what we're doing is we're choosing preference over purpose. And I want us to get to a point in our heart where it's like, God, your purpose is greater than my preference. And if you want 2 services or 11 services, whatever you want, God, because your children matter to you. I think if people can start catching that, it can start to change. Culture changes at 30%, by the way. That's when culture changes. So if you think about like, okay, we got, I don't know, I'm just using round numbers. We got 200 people in our church. Okay, well, 30% of 200 is 60. Do we have 60 volunteers? Okay, if we can get 60 volunteers all thinking the same thing, the rest of the church will follow eventually.
Yeah.
You'll get 1 or 2 people complain, but they'll follow. It is not as much of a cultural issue as much of a preference over purpose issue.
That's good.
Get them to think differently.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super good, Chris. Thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely, man. Hey, thanks for jumping on, you guys. I hope you found it beneficial, and man,
Yeah.
it's awesome. And man, anything that Church Boom can do for you, anything that we can do for you, that's what we're here for, man. To help in any way we can.
Thank you very much.
All right, you guys have a good day.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye, guys. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Kevin and talking about how and when to add services. It was a great conversation, and want to remind you to check out churchboom.org and sign up for Church Boom University, an ongoing platform for you to continue to grow as a leader, which is crucial and important. So check that out at churchboom.org, and we will see you on the next Fly on the Wall podcast.